Tony Carruthers lived in Shelby County, Tennessee in the early 1990s. He was a man who would commit one of the most horrific incidents in the area's history. Carruthers made choices on February 24, 1994, that would shock everyone who heard about them. Marcellus Anderson was 21 years old and had his whole life ahead of him. His mother, Delois Anderson, loved her son and was proud of the man he was becoming. Frederick Tucker was another person who crossed paths with Tony Carruthers that February day. None of them knew what Carruthers had planned. On February 24, 1994, Carruthers decided to take 3 innocent people from their normal lives. He kidnapped Marcellus Anderson, Delois Anderson, and Frederick Tucker. Carruthers forced all 3 individuals to come with him against their will. He took them to a location where no one could hear them scream for help. Carruthers was carrying a firearm and had decided that these 3 people would not survive the day. Carruthers used his weapon to cause serious harm to Marcellus Anderson and Frederick Tucker. Both men were wounded by gunfire from Carruthers' firearm. The 2 men were badly hurt but were still alive after the discharge. What Carruthers did next was even more horrifying than anyone could imagine. He took all 3 individuals to Rose Hill Cemetery in Shelby County. Carruthers had dug a grave in the cemetery before bringing his captives there. Carruthers forced Marcellus Anderson, Delois Anderson, and Frederick Tucker into the grave he had prepared. Carruthers buried all 3 people alive in that grave at Rose Hill Cemetery. The 3 individuals passed away slowly and painfully in that grave. A mother and son were unalived together along with another innocent person. Carruthers had committed one of the most brutal incidents anyone could imagine. The bodies were discovered at Rose Hill Cemetery after someone reported suspicious activity. Shelby County Police responded and found the grave with 3 people inside. The investigation began immediately. Police worked around the clock to find who was responsible for this terrible incident. Witnesses came forward with information about Carruthers' movements that day. Evidence connected him to the kidnapping and the 3 deaths. Carruthers was arrested and charged with kidnapping and first-degree offense for all 3 individuals. The prosecution built a strong case showing how Carruthers was responsible for taking 3 innocent lives in such a horrible way. During the trial, witnesses testified about seeing Carruthers with the 3 individuals before they were found deceased. Physical evidence connected him to the incident at Rose Hill Cemetery. Carruthers' defense team tried to challenge the evidence and witness testimony. They claimed prosecutorial misconduct and argued that evidence was suppressed. None of their arguments could overcome the facts of what Carruthers had done. The judge sentenced him to death for kidnapping and taking the lives of Marcellus Anderson, Delois Anderson, and Frederick Tucker. Carruthers would spend his remaining years in the Capital Punishment Facility. 3 families lost their loved ones because Tony Carruthers chose to commit unthinkable acts of violence. Marcellus Anderson, his mother Delois Anderson, and Frederick Tucker were taken from life in the most horrible way possible on that February day in 1994. Preston Carter was living in Memphis, Tennessee in 1993. He was a man who would make a terrible mistake that cost 2 innocent people their lives. Carter had fallen into a life of violence that led him to commit one of the most brutal home invasions in Memphis history. Thomas and Tenja Jackson were a young couple with a small daughter named Tierney. They had no idea that Preston Carter was about to destroy their lives. On May 28, 1993, Carter teamed up with 2 accomplices, Darnell Vavery and Lewis Anderson. The 3 men wanted to rob a drug dealer but had the wrong address. They mistakenly targeted the Jacksons' apartment instead. During the early morning hours, Carter and Anderson knocked on the Jacksons' door while Ivory waited outside. Thomas Jackson came to the door but refused to open it when they demanded drugs and money. The men realized they had the wrong apartment but didn't leave. Carter handed a sawed-off shotgun to Anderson and kicked in the apartment door. The 2 perpetrators burst inside and demanded money while Ivory stayed outside. Thomas Jackson was forced into a closet while Anderson committed terrible acts against Tenja Jackson. Carter found Thomas Jackson crouching in his daughter's bedroom closet trying to protect himself. Carter used the sawed-off shotgun to take Jackson's life at point-blank range. The discharge was fatal and Jackson was unalived instantly. Carter then found Tenja Jackson in the bathroom. She begged for her life and pleaded with him not to hurt her. Carter ignored her desperate pleas and used his weapon on her at close range. She passed away instantly. Thomas Jackson's co-workers arrived at 4 a.m. to pick him up for work at a local bakery. They found the door kicked in and little Tierney lying in blood beside her deceased father. The child was physically unharmed but traumatized. Preston Carter was arrested that same evening on May 28, 1993. He confessed to police that he was responsible for both deaths. The sawed-off shotgun Carter used was found in his apartment, and he admitted using this weapon on the two individuals. During Carter's trial, the prosecution showed how he destroyed an entire family because of a case of mistaken identity. They proved that Carter used a sawed-off shotgun to cause both deaths during the home invasion. The evidence against Carter was overwhelming. Carter was found guilty and sentenced to death for taking Thomas and Tensha Jackson's lives. Carter would spend his remaining years in the capital punishment facility. 2 young parents were taken from life and a small child was left orphaned because Preston Carter chose violence over walking away. Tyrone Chalmers was 21 years old when his life changed forever on a hot summer night in Memphis, Tennessee. Born and raised in the city, Chalmers had already been in trouble with the law before. He had prior convictions for attempted especially aggravated robbery and attempted first-degree offense. These earlier incidents would later play a crucial role in sealing his fate. On August 20, 1994, Chalmers was driving around Memphis with 2 accomplices. They were looking for someone to rob. The night was still young, and they needed money. What happened next would cost a man his life and send Chalmers to a correctional facility for the rest of his days. The 3 individuals found their target near Netherwood Street in Memphis. The person they chose was Randy Allen, a 28-year-old African-American man who was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Chalmers and his accomplices approached Allen and forced him to undress. They robbed him of just $3. $3. That was all the money Allen had on him. After taking everything Allen had, Chalmers caused his death. The individual was left lying face down on the sidewalk with his pants and underwear pulled down around his ankles. His body was discovered at approximately 5 a.m. the next morning by someone walking through the neighborhood. The investigation moved quickly. Police in Memphis worked to identify the perpetrators involved in this brutal incident. Evidence led them to Chalmers and his 2 accomplices. The case was clear-cut. Chalmers was arrested and charged with felony offense and especially aggravated robbery. The prosecution had a strong case against him. His prior convictions made him a repeat offender in the eyes of the law. In 1997, Chalmers faced trial in Shelby County. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The jury found him guilty on all charges. The prosecution argued for the death penalty, citing his previous convictions as an aggravating factor. The defense tried to present mitigating circumstances, but the damage was done. The judge sentenced Chalmers to death. He was sent to River Bend Maximum Security Institution where he remains today. Chalmers has spent over 25 years on death row. His case has gone through numerous appeals. In 2022, a federal judge ruled that Chalmers could pursue arguments that he is intellectually disabled and should not receive capital punishment under state law. This ruling gave him another chance to fight his sentence. Chalmers, now 49 years old, continues to challenge his death sentence through the legal system. His case serves as a stark reminder of how a single night of poor decisions can destroy multiple lives forever. For $3 and a moment of criminal thinking, Chalmers took away Randy Allen's future and condemned himself to spend his remaining years in a correctional facility. Kevin Burns has spent nearly 30 years on death row for an incident he claims he did not commit. His case shows how the felony offense rule can lead to controversial convictions and death sentences. Burns was a young man in 1992 when his life changed forever during a robbery gone wrong in Nashville, Tennessee. What started as a planned theft would end with 2 individuals losing their lives and Burns facing the ultimate punishment for offenses many believe he did not directly commit. On a night in 1992, Burns and 2 other individuals planned to rob someone in Nashville. The plan was simple. They would take money and leave, but nothing went according to plan. During the robbery, chaos broke out. Gunfire erupted in the confusion. When the smoke cleared, 2 people had been taken from life. Damon Dawson, just 17 years old, and Tracy Johnson, 23, were both deceased. Burns insists he never discharged a firearm. He maintains that he did not cause the deaths of either individual. But under Tennessee's felony offense rule, it did not matter who pulled the trigger. The investigation led police to Burns and his accomplices. All three were arrested and charged with felony offense. The felony offense rule allowed prosecutors to charge anyone involved in the robbery with the deaths, even if they did not directly cause them. Burns faced trial in 1995. The prosecution's case relied heavily on the felony offense rule. They argued that Burns was responsible for the deaths because he participated in the robbery that led to them. During the trial, something controversial happened. While the prosecution initially relied on the felony offense rule, during closing arguments they shifted their narrative. They suggested Burns was actually the one who discharged the firearm that caused the deaths. Burns was convicted in 1995 on 2 counts of felony offense, receiving a death sentence for Dawson's case and a life sentence for Johnson's case. His co-defendants received different sentences. One received life in prison and made parole in 2023. Another was also convicted but received a lesser sentence. Burns was the only one sentenced to death. The difference in sentences has raised questions about fairness in the justice system. Appeals courts have upheld Burns' conviction and sentence multiple times over the years. Burns has spent nearly 30 years on death row in a Nashville correctional facility. His legal options have been exhausted. The U.S. Supreme Court denied his final appeal, with Justice Sotomayor writing a dissent criticizing the decision. While awaiting his fate, Burns has found religion and built a church on death row. He has become a mentor to other inmates and works as a deacon in the prison ministry. His case has attracted attention from advocacy groups who believe he was wrongly convicted. The Felony Offense Elimination Project has taken up Burns' cause, arguing he is serving the death penalty for an incident he did not commit. His story highlights the controversial nature of the felony offense rule, which can result in death sentences for individuals who did not directly cause deaths. Whether Burns discharged the firearm or not, his participation in the robbery led to his current situation. His case serves as a stark reminder that criminal decisions can have consequences far beyond what anyone expects, even when the worst outcomes were never intended. Sedrick Clayton was 31 years old when he committed one of the most shocking incidents in Memphis history. His case shows how domestic disputes can escalate into unthinkable violence that destroys entire families. Clayton had no serious offense record before the night that changed everything. He had only traffic violations on his record. This made what happened even more shocking to those who knew him. His clean background would later be used by his defense team to argue for mercy, but it was not enough to save him from the ultimate punishment. During the early morning hours of January 19, 2012, a domestic dispute erupted between Clayton and Pasha Fisher, his 23-year-old girlfriend, at the Fisher family home in Memphis. The argument started like many others between couples, but this time something snapped. The situation escalated, and Clayton discharged a firearm at all 3 individuals in the home. Pasha Fisher, 23 years old, was taken from life. Her parents, Erithio Fisher and Patricia Fisher, were also deceased. The violence did not stop there. Clayton also discharged his firearm toward the area where Erithio Fisher had been sleeping. Somehow, the younger Fisher family member survived the attack. After causing the deaths of 3 individuals and attempting to harm a 4th, Clayton fled the residence in Pasha Fisher's vehicle. He stole his deceased girlfriend's car to escape the scene of his offenses. The Memphis Police Department launched an investigation immediately. The evidence against Clayton was overwhelming. He had been in a relationship with one of the individuals affected and was known to the family. There was no question about who was responsible for this tragic incident. Clayton was arrested and charged with multiple serious offenses. A Shelby County jury convicted Clayton of the first-degree premeditated offenses of Erithio Fisher, Patricia Fisher, and Pasha Fisher, and the attempted first-degree offense of Erithio Fisher. He was also convicted of firearm-related charges and unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. The prosecution argued for the death penalty, pointing to the brutal nature of the offenses and the fact that he destroyed an entire family. defense attorney Gerald Scahan asked the jury to spare Clayton's life and sentence him to life in prison for several reasons, including the pain his punishment would cause his family, and the fact Clayton had no prior adult offense record other than traffic violations. The defense tried to show mitigating factors that might convince the jury to show mercy. They argued that his clean record showed this was out of character for him. They pleaded with the jury to consider the impact on Clayton's own family if he received the death penalty. The 7-day capital offense trial of Clayton came to an end on a Sunday night. It took the jury a little over 3 hours to decide Clayton should receive the death penalty by lethal injection for his offenses. The jury sentenced Clayton to death for each first-degree premeditated offense conviction. He also received 15 years for attempted first-degree offense and additional time for the other charges. The Tennessee Supreme Court has affirmed the convictions and sentences of death for Sedrick Clayton. His appeals have been unsuccessful. Clayton remains on death row in a Tennessee correctional facility. His case serves as a stark reminder that domestic violence can escalate to deadly levels in seconds. What started as an argument between a couple ended with 3 individuals deceased and a 4th narrowly escaping death. Clayton's moment of rage destroyed the Fisher family and condemned him to spend his remaining years awaiting punishment. The tragedy shows how quickly lives can be lost and how domestic disputes should never be taken lightly. Jessie Dotson committed one of the worst mass offenses in Memphis history when he destroyed his own family in a single night of violence. His case became known as the Leicester Street Massacre, a name that still haunts the city today. Dotson was 34 years old when he took the lives of 6 individuals, including his own brother and 2 young nephews. What makes this case even more shocking is that Dotson attacked children, leaving 3 more fighting for their lives. Hodoels probus indicambixinre. The incident would become one of Tennessee's most notorious family annihilation cases. On the early morning hours of March 2, 2008, Dotson went to his brother's home at 722 Leicester Street in the Binghamton neighborhood of Memphis. His brother Cecil Dotson, 30 years old, lived there with his fiancée Marissa Williams, 27, and Cecil's 5 children, ranging in age from 9 years to 2 months old. Also staying at the home were Hollis Seals and Shindry Roberson. The house had been home to this extended family for 5 or 6 months. Cecil worked as a maintenance man at an apartment complex and was trying to build a life for his large family. What happened next shocked even experienced police officers. Dotson used both a firearm and a knife to attack everyone in the home. He took the lives of his brothers Cecil, Marissa Williams, Hollis Seals, Shindry Roberson, and 2 of Cecil's children, a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old. But Dotson did not stop there. He also attacked 3 other children in the home, ranging from 9 years old to just 2 months old. He left them for dead, assuming they would not survive their injuries. The 3 surviving children lay severely injured in the home for more than 24 hours before emergency personnel arrived late in the afternoon of March 3, 2008. The children had been stabbed and beaten, but somehow managed to stay alive despite their terrible injuries. One of the surviving children would later become a key witness in the case against Dotson. The scene was so horrific that it traumatized even veteran law enforcement officers who had seen many violent incidents. The Memphis Police Department launched one of the largest investigations in the city's history. The case was featured on the television show The First 48 because of its shocking nature. Evidence quickly pointed to Dotson as the perpetrator responsible for the massacre. He was arrested and charged with 6 counts of first-degree premeditated offense and 3 counts of attempted first-degree offense. The prosecution had overwhelming evidence against him, including testimony from the surviving children. Dotson went to trial in 2010. The jury heard testimony about the brutal nature of the attacks and the suffering of the individuals affected. After hearing all the evidence, the jury found Dotson guilty on all counts. At a separate sentencing hearing, the jury found the proof established multiple aggravating circumstances beyond a reasonable doubt. Jessie Dotson was sentenced to 6 death sentences in Tennessee on October 12, 2010 for killing 6 people, including his brother and 2 young nephews, on March 2, 2008. The man already sentenced to death 6 times for the city's worst mass murder case received an additional 120 years in prison Tuesday for beating and stabbing 3 children who survived. The judge noted that Dotson showed no regard for human life. The Tennessee Supreme Court has affirmed Dotson's convictions and death sentences. His appeals have been unsuccessful over the years. Dotson remains on death row in a Tennessee correctional facility. Jessie Dotson, a man sentenced to death for killing 6 people in 2008 in the Binghamton neighborhood of Memphis, Tennessee, has filed a petition claiming innocence and alleging prosecutorial misconduct. Dotson, the convicted killer serving 6 death sentences for the Leicester Street murders, is now attempting to appeal his conviction, claiming his nephew's testimony was invalid due to mind-altering medication. His case serves as one of the most disturbing examples of family violence in Tennessee history. Dotson's actions destroyed an entire family and left a community traumatized by the senseless violence. Sean Finnegan committed one of the most disturbing offenses in Tennessee history when he tortured and took the life of Jennifer Gale Paxton in 2019. His case became known for its extreme cruelty and the shocking way he kept the individual's body hidden for months. Finnegan was 57 years old when he committed these terrible acts alongside his girlfriend Rebecca Dishman. What makes this case especially disturbing is the calculated nature of the violence and the way Finnegan treated Paxton's remains after her death. The case would become one of Tennessee's most notorious torture incidents. In late December 2019, Finnegan and Dishman kidnapped Jennifer Paxton, a 36-year-old woman from Knoxville. They brought her to Finnegan's home in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where they held her against her will. What happened next shocked even experienced law enforcement officers who had seen many violent incidents. Over the course of several days, Finnegan and Dishman subjected Paxton to terrible mistreatment. Finnegan would pause during the violence to take smoke breaks before continuing the attacks. The individual was kept alive for the purpose of prolonging her suffering. Finnegan eventually strangled Paxton, causing her death in his home. But the cruelty did not end there. After taking her life, Finnegan and Dishman broke Paxton's bones so her body would fit inside a stand-up freezer. They kept her frozen remains in Finnegan's bedroom for 8 months. The body was stored under his bed in the freezer while Finnegan continued his daily life as if nothing had happened. This level of callousness shows the depths of his disturbed mind. The Oak Ridge Police Department discovered Paxton's frozen body in August 2020 during a search of Finnegan's residence. The scene was so horrific that it traumatized investigators. Both Finnegan and Dishman were arrested and charged with kidnapping, sexual assault, first-degree premeditated offense, and abuse of a corpse. The prosecution announced they would seek the death penalty for both perpetrators due to the especially heinous nature of the offenses. Rebecca Dishman eventually pleaded guilty in September 2023 and agreed to testify against Finnegan in exchange for a life sentence plus 50 years at 100%. Her testimony would become crucial evidence in the case against Finnegan. She provided gruesome details about what they did to Paxton during her captivity and how they disposed of her body afterward. Finnegan went to trial in August 2024. The jury heard testimony about the brutal nature of the mistreatment and the suffering inflicted on Paxton. Dishman testified against her former boyfriend, describing the terrible acts they committed together. The evidence against Finnegan was overwhelming. The jury found him guilty of kidnapping, sexual assault, and first-degree premeditated offense. In a separate sentencing hearing, they decided he should receive the death penalty. A judge sentenced Finnegan to death by lethal injection on August 21, 2024. The jury found that his actions were heinous and cruel enough to warrant the ultimate punishment. They noted that Finnegan had mutilated Paxton's body and showed no regard for human life. In March 2025, a judge added 45 more years to his death sentence for additional charges connected to the offense. Finnegan remains on death row at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution in Tennessee. His case serves as one of the most disturbing examples of torture and mistreatment in the state's history. The calculated nature of his violence and the way he kept Paxton's body hidden for months shows the depths of human cruelty. Finnegan's actions destroyed not only Paxton's life but also traumatized everyone involved in investigating and prosecuting his offenses. His case serves as a stark reminder that some individuals are capable of unthinkable evil. James Hawkins committed one of the most disturbing domestic violence incidents in Memphis history when he destroyed his family in 2008. His case shows how intimate partner violence can escalate to unthinkable levels and how children can become unwilling participants in their parents' offenses. Hawkins was 31 years old and a prison parolee when he took the life of his longtime girlfriend. What makes his case particularly shocking is that he forced his own 12-year-old daughter to help him hide the evidence of his offense. This twisted dynamic would later become a key part of the prosecution's case against him. Hawkins lived with Charlene Gaither, 28 years old, and their 3 children in a Memphis apartment. Gaither was the mother of his 3 children, ages 12, 11, and 9. The couple had been together for years, but their relationship was troubled. Hawkins had been in and out of the correctional system and was on parole when the incident occurred. In February 2008, a domestic dispute between Hawkins and Gaither escalated beyond control. What started as an argument between the couple would end with Gaither losing her life and their children being traumatized forever. Hawkins used a knife to attack Gaither in their apartment. The violence happened in the presence of their 12-year-old daughter, who witnessed her father take her mother's life. But Hawkins did not stop there. After causing Gaither's death, he forced his young daughter to help him hide her mother's body in a freezer. The child was threatened and coerced into helping clean the scene of the offense. Hawkins told his daughter he would harm her if she refused to help him. The psychological trauma inflicted on this child cannot be measured. The next day, Hawkins purchased a power saw and forced his daughter to help him move her mother's body to a bathtub. The details of what happened next are too disturbing to describe in full, but Hawkins dismembered Gaither's body and forced his daughter to participate in the disposal process. The child was made to help dispose of body parts, including being forced to help remove her mother's head, hands, and feet. This level of cruelty toward both the deceased individual and the surviving child shows the depths of Hawkins' depravity. The Memphis Police Department launched an investigation when Gaither was reported missing. The evidence led them to Hawkins and the horrific scene in their apartment. He was arrested and charged with first-degree premeditated offense, abuse of a corpse, and initiating a false report. During the investigation, his young daughter had to testify about the terrible things her father made her do. The testimony of this brave child would become crucial evidence in the case against Hawkins. Hawkins went to trial in 2011. The jury heard testimony about the brutal nature of the offense and the psychological torture inflicted on the child witness. The prosecution argued for the death penalty, pointing to the especially heinous nature of the offense and the trauma caused to the children. The defense tried to argue for mercy, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury found Hawkins guilty of first-degree premeditated offense. In a separate sentencing hearing, they sentenced him to death. He also received 12 years for initiating a false report and 6 years for abuse of a corpse, to be served consecutively with the death sentence. The Tennessee Supreme Court affirmed Hawkins' conviction and death sentence in 2017. His appeals have been unsuccessful. Hawkins remains on death row in a Tennessee correctional facility. His case serves as one of the most disturbing examples of domestic violence and child abuse in the state's history. The trauma inflicted on his children, especially the daughter who was forced to participate in covering up her mother's offense, shows how domestic violence destroys entire families. Hawkins' actions not only took Gaither's life but also stole his children's innocence and sense of safety forever. David Ivey was released from prison in June 2000 and placed on parole. He was 31 years old and had already spent years behind bars. Shortly after his release, he began dating Lakeisha Thomas, a young woman who had no idea what kind of man she was getting involved with. What started as a relationship quickly turned into something much darker. Ivy was controlling and violent from the beginning. Lakeisha's cousin Jackie Bland saw Ivy pull Lakeisha's hair on multiple occasions. Another cousin, Deborah Kelly, witnessed Avi grab Lakeisha by her hair and heard him threaten her, saying, "I told you about playing with me, bitch." The situation got worse when Lakeisha told friends that Ivy had her on what he called 23 and 1 inch, meaning she could only leave her apartment for 1 hour each day. He was isolating her completely. By May 2001, things escalated dangerously. Lakeisha called police when Ivy forced his way into her apartment and threatened to take her life. Officer Alvin Clark responded and found Lakeisha shaken and terrified. She told him that Ivy had been making threats because she wanted to end the relationship. But Ivy wasn't done. On June 6, 2001, Ivy attacked Lakeisha at a convenience store. He struck her in the head with a black firearm, leaving her with a 2-inch cut on her head, bruises on her chest and a black eye. When Officer Steve Cummings found her bleeding at her cousin's apartment, Lakeisha told him that Ivy said he wasn't going back to jail, and that he would take her life. She was terrified and had good reason to be. Lakeisha went to the Criminal Justice Center to get a warrant for aggravated assault against Avi. As she and her cousins drove there, Ivy followed them in his car. When they stopped at a liquor store afterward, Ivy appeared in the parking lot and approached their car. Store surveillance cameras captured what happened next. Ivy told Lakeisha, "If you put the police in my business, I'm going to take your life." Store employees Terrance Hibbler and Frank Sullivan heard the threat and saw Lakeisha shaking badly. She told them, "I know he's going to unalive me." Lakeisha obtained an order of protection against Avi that same day. 2 days later, on the morning of June 8, 2001, Lakeisha was sitting in her car outside Bland's apartment complex with her friend Andrea Hunt. Ivy ran up to the car wearing a black cap and towel over part of his face. He pulled the towel down and said, "Oh, you want me deceased, huh?" Then he discharged his firearm 5 times at Lakeisha and fled the scene. Bland saw the incident unfold and immediately recognized Avi despite his partial disguise. Gregory Kelly, a maintenance supervisor at the complex, heard the gunshots and ran to help. He pulled Lakeisha from the car and tried to stop the bleeding while shouting for someone to call 911. But it was too late. The medical examiner later determined that all 5 gunshots entered the right side of Lakeisha's body from less than 2 feet away. 2 struck her heart directly, affecting all her major organs except her spleen. Officer Clark arrived at the scene and saw a white car speeding away from the apartment complex, a car that matched Avi's vehicle. Lakeisha Thomas was deceased at the scene. She was only 24 years old. Ivy was arrested on June 27, 2001, and held at Shelby County Correctional Facility. But in May 2002, he escaped. For 2 months he remained on the run until police caught him in San Diego, California. When officers tried to arrest him, he dove through a window and ran for several blocks before they finally captured him. At trial, the evidence against Avi Way was overwhelming. Multiple witnesses, surveillance footage, and a clear pattern of escalating violence all pointed to premeditated action. The jury convicted him of first-degree premeditated offense resulting in death. Davy Way was sentenced to death and placed on capital punishment facility housing. He has filed multiple appeals over the years, but remains on Tennessee's death row more than 20 years after he took Lakeisha Thomas's life in a parking lot on that June morning. Andre Bland was 19 when he made a decision that put him on Tennessee's capital punishment facility. On October 9, 1992, Andre was at Southbrook apartment complex in Memphis with friends playing dice. When the game ended around 10 p.m., the group wandered outside looking for trouble. Between 10:30 and 11:30 p.m., they spotted strangers Ernest Norman and Marcel Nugent heading to their car. The group approached them, asking for money. When Norman and Nugent ignored them, someone struck Norman in the head. Norman broke free and ran, hearing gunfire as he fled. He escaped and called 911. Nugent locked himself in the car but was trapped and surrounded. 20-year-old Ontrain Sanders, known as Terry, drove into the parking lot and got out to see what was happening. The men said something to Terry, and he turned to head back to his car. Andre discharged his chrome 9mm firearm, striking Terry in the leg. Blood poured as Terry fled 273 feet through the complex. Andre and Daryl Bailey chased the wounded man. When Terry hid under a pickup truck, Andre shot him again, then discharged his firearm at least 2 more times while Terry lay helpless underneath. Henry Adams heard gunfire from his apartment and saw a man with a firearm kneeling by the truck. He heard Terry screaming, "Oh God, please help me," and called 911. Floyd Johnson, who owned the truck, tried to calm Terry for 15 minutes until the ambulance arrived. While Terry fought for his life, Andre returned to rob Nugent. The group broke the car window, pulled Nugent out, and Andre shot him in the leg. They robbed and beat Nugent before scattering. Terry passed away in the ambulance. He was 20 and left behind 2 daughters, ages 2 and 4. 2 days later, Andre turned himself in at his mother's urging. He confessed but claimed he wasn't trying to take anyone's life. The medical examiner found 9 gunshot wounds to Terry's leg. 1 lacerated his artery, causing him to bleed to death over 15 minutes while conscious and in pain. Terry's deaf mother testified that her son was sweet, never in trouble, and his daughters were devastated. Andre's defense showed his troubled background: no father, high school dropout, juvenile record since 11. The jury found Andre guilty of first-degree premeditated offense resulting in death. They determined it was especially heinous and cruel. Andre Bland was sentenced to death and remains on Tennessee's capital punishment facility 30 years later.